Roanoke Island. They sent my four-man team to find a missing survey crew and to verify a strange beacon that kept pinging from the old earthen fort. We came in quiet, swept the site, and found fresh tracks beside 16th century carvings that should not have been clean. Then our boat line was cut. Radios bled with a voice that used our names. We pushed inland and saw woven screens across the trees, fish racks still dripping, and a ring of carved shells set like sentries. The tribe that stepped out wore bone mass and ash on their skin. They looked at us like we were expected. One of them held a laminated Coast Guard ID. Before we start, make sure to hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I will tell you why we were chosen and how the island closed around us. We reached Roanoke Island by airboat just before dusk. The mainland command briefed us only hours before deployment. They said a civilian survey crew had vanished while studying erosion sites near the old fort. Last transmission came from a beacon they'd set up in the marsh. The signal was strong but distorted, looping the same coordinates again and again. Our job was to confirm what happened and extract any survivors. Straightforward on paper. Our unit was small. I led the recon detail, joined by Alvarez, a calm medic who never spoke more than he had to. Grant, our comms man with a sharp sense of humor, and Mason, our youngest rifleman, barely 2 tours in. We'd all served in wet, miserable terrain before, but this place felt different the second we touched down. The air smelled stale, heavy with salt and decay. Trees leaned toward the water like they were reaching for something they'd lost. Command kept us on tight radio protocol. They didn't want civilian chatter leaking out. Something about this mission had layers. The island was supposed to be clear, but we found old barricades in the brush, metal stakes and rusted wire that looked more like World War II defenses than modern survey gear. Alvarez said maybe locals tried to preserve history. Mason joked they'd preserved it too well. No one laughed. The campsite was half collapsed when we found it. Tents shredded, personal gear scattered, a half-eaten ration bar still fresh. The beacon sat in the mud, its casing cracked, but its light still pulsing red. Grant got the signal running, though the feed made no sense. It was picking up transmissions from different eras, voices that called for help in archaic English, fragments like, "We are not alone here," and "The tribe keeps watch." He tried to brush it off as frequency bleed from the Coast Guard. I didn't believe him. We found a journal too, buried under a wet tarp. It belonged to one of the missing researchers. Most pages were ruined, but a few were legible. Notes on soil samples, erosion patterns, and then, near the end, one chilling line. "They're watching from the tree line. They wear faces that aren't theirs." Alvarez looked at me and whispered, "You think they're still here?" I said we'd find out at first light. That night we built a small perimeter near the wrecked camp. The island was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, only the faint sound of the tide hitting the marsh. Mason said it reminded him of a graveyard. He wasn't wrong. When the wind shifted, you could hear faint singing, or what sounded like it, drifting across the water. The melody was slow, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. Grant tried recording it, but the audio came back warped, as if someone whispered over it in another tongue. Sleep didn't come easy. I sat watch and stared at the beacon's dull glow. I kept thinking about the name Roanoke, the lost colony, the unsolved disappearance that haunted every schoolbook. It wasn't supposed to mean anything now, but standing there, it felt like the island remembered. It was holding on to something we couldn't see. At dawn, we swept north toward the beacon's source point. We moved in a tight wedge through thick underbrush. Grant monitored the signal, and the closer we got, the more interference we heard. Static mixed with faint drumming, slow and steady, like a heartbeat buried under noise. Alvarez said it was nothing but overlapping waves. I wasn't sure. Half a mile in, we reached the ruins of an old fort. Brick walls overgrown with moss, wooden beams half sunk in mud. The ground was uneven, like it had been disturbed. Mason pointed to a pattern etched into the dirt, a spiral made of small shells and charred stones. It wasn't random, it was arranged. We spread out, checking for signs of the crew. Alvarez found footprints near the inner wall, barefoot, adult-sized, leading toward the woods. Grant picked up faint chatter on his headset again, Multiple voices layered in whispers, repeating coordinates we already knew. Then everything went silent, except for a sharp tone that lasted 3 seconds. That's when Mason shouted. He'd found something near the embankment. We ran over and saw what stopped him. It was a mask carved from bone, hanging from a branch. It had hollow eyes and a slit mouth, painted with dried blood. Beneath it, a bundle of reeds tied with string. Inside the bundle was a modern GPS tracker, still blinking green. Grant muttered, "Who the hell would do this?" I didn't have an answer. Alvarez said we should head back and call it in. I agreed, but when we turned toward the path we came from, the trail was gone. The brush had shifted. The trees seemed closer together, thicker, darker. Grant checked his compass. The needle spun like it had lost its mind. We decided to move toward open ground, hoping to find the shoreline again. The deeper we went, the colder the air grew. I could see my breath even though it was early summer. Mason said he felt someone walking behind us. I told him to stay sharp and keep eyes on his sector. Still, I felt it too. We broke through the tree line near what looked like another campsite. Though not ours, handmade huts built from bark and branches, fires long dead, remnants of tools, woven baskets, and human bones arranged in circles. The huts were too well made to be old ruins. Someone had been living here recently. Alvarez whispered a prayer under his breath. We found symbols carved into nearby trees, same spiral shapes as before, but deeper, darker. They looked freshly cut. In the center clearing stood a totem, built from driftwood and skull fragments. At its base lay the same kind of laminated ID we found earlier, this time belonging to one of the missing surveyors. I radioed command, but all I got was static. Grant switched channels, tried the emergency band, nothing. Mason said, "Maybe we should take the boat and leave." I looked toward the shore, where our landing path should have been. There was only water, no sign of the airboat, no tracks, no path. The tide had risen high, covering everything. The island had changed shape overnight. I remember standing there realizing that we weren't just stranded. We were being kept. Every direction we turned, the same symbols, the same spiral marks, as if guiding us somewhere. I didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew it. Whatever was watching us from the trees was waiting for us to follow. And we did, because by then there was no other way off the island. We followed the spiral markings deeper into the trees. The forest grew dense, wet, and silent. The air smelled like copper and rain, though the sky was clear. Grant kept the signal meter in his hand, eyes locked on the flickering screen. It pulsed faster with every step, like something underground was tracking us back. None of us spoke for a long stretch. We just kept walking. The sound of the marsh faded. All that was left was the crunch of boots in the soil and the low hum from Grant's receiver. Alvarez moved up beside me and said we were heading west when we should have been going north. He pointed out that moss was on the wrong side of the trees. He was right. It felt like the forest was rearranging itself. We found a clearing around noon. In the middle stood a wooden pole wrapped with rope and dried reeds. Around it lay small piles of bones, not animal. Some had carvings etched into them, names and short words we couldn't read. Mason bent to pick one up, but I told him not to touch it. Alvarez said the markings looked like early colonial letters, but mixed with native patterns. The carvings were old, yet the cuts were clean. Grant kneeled near the pole and brushed the dirt. He found a small wooden box buried halfway in the mud. He opened it and froze. Inside was a small radio. Modern issue, same model as ours, with a tag from the survey team. The batteries were still good. It switched on by itself and played a single phrase in a faint voice, repeating twice before going dead. "Don't follow the drums." The words hit hard because I had heard them before. In my headset, faint, hours earlier, while we moved through the brush. Grant said maybe it was interference again. Alvarez said maybe it was a warning left for us. Mason looked around the clearing and whispered, "Then who buried it?" We stayed quiet after that. The forest pressed closer, the branches overhead blocking the light. The temperature dropped again. The humidity turned to mist. I noticed footprints that weren't ours moving in both directions along the same trail. Barefoot, wide-spaced, deep in the mud. Some looked small, childlike, others much larger. By late afternoon, we reached an elevated ridge that looked down toward a swamp basin. Through the fog, we saw shapes moving, slow and deliberate. At first, we thought they were animals. Then one lifted its head, a face painted white with black lines across the eyes. It looked up toward us as if it knew exactly where we stood. Alvarez raised his rifle, but I motioned him to hold. The figure lowered its head and vanished behind the trees. We kept low and watched for several minutes. Then we saw others. 5, maybe 6. All wore bone ornaments and carried long sticks with what looked like carved blades. Their skin was covered in ash and red pigment. They moved in silence, no sound at all, like shadows sliding through fog. Mason whispered that maybe they were reenactors or locals, but the way they moved didn't look like play. It looked like patrol. Grant whispered he was picking up shortwave signals again. I handed him the headset. The voices were back. This time they were clearer, speaking in fragments of English and something older. You walk in circles, you feed the ground. They remember your scent. Alvarez took off the headset, eyes wide. This isn't radio, he said. Night fell fast. We couldn't risk open fires, so we used our flashlights sparingly. Mason took first watch while the rest of us rested in shifts. Around midnight, I woke to a noise that made my stomach drop. The same drumming from before, faint but steady, coming from the distance. It started slow, one beat every few seconds, then grew faster, syncing with our heartbeats. Grant switched on his handheld and tried tracing the sound. The signal jumped between channels, spiking each time the drum hit. Alvarez said he saw lights moving between the trees, small flames like torches. Mason gripped his rifle so tight his hands shook. I told them to stay quiet. We crouched low behind a fallen tree and watched. Figures moved along the ridge below, carrying torches in a line. They wore animal skulls on their heads and dragged branches behind them, scraping the ground in rhythm. At the end of the line was a man or something shaped like one, taller than the rest, covered in woven vines with a hollow in his chest that glowed faintly red. He stopped and turned his head toward us. I swear his eyes reflected the light, like glass catching fire. No one moved. The drumming stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then every torch went out, leaving nothing but darkness. A few seconds later, we heard whispering, soft and close. Too close. Mason fired a warning shot into the air. The muzzle flash lit up dozens of faces in the tree line. Pale, maskless, eyes wide. They didn't flinch. They just watched. We ran. Branches snapped. Mud splashed. Voices echoed behind us, calling our names. I didn't stop until I hit open ground again. Grant fell. Alvarez pulled him up. Mason stumbled, but kept running. We didn't see the figures after that, but the sound of footsteps followed us for miles. When we stopped, we were near the ruins of another fort structure. Inside, stone walls crumbled under thick vines, and the smell of burnt wood filled the air. In the center of the courtyard was a small pit still smoking, as if a fire had burned there recently. Above it, hanging from a wooden frame, was a body, not one of the missing team. It was older, mummified, the skin stretched tight. Around its neck hung a tag, military issue, rusted and worn. It dated back to 1943. Grant muttered that the island had seen military tests during the war, some secret radio experiments. Maybe those soldiers never left. Alvarez said this wasn't a grave, it was a warning. Mason just stared at the body, whispering the same line over and over. Don't follow the drums. We rested inside the fort. The stone walls gave a small sense of safety, though none of us truly felt it. I checked the body again, more carefully this time. The bones were scorched, the hands bound with old rope. Carved into the chest, above the ribs, were the same spiral symbols. Beneath it, faint letters read, "We stayed when we should have left." Around dawn, the mist rolled in heavy. The trees outside disappeared behind a white curtain. The air was colder again. Grant tried the radio, and for the first time in hours, we heard a signal. A man's voice repeating our call signs, asking for coordinates. We responded at once. The voice said help was en route, told us to move to the northern shore, and prepare for extraction. We packed fast and headed north. The voice kept guiding us, left at the ridge, straight through the basin, follow the drums. That last part made me freeze. Say again, I asked. The line crackled. Then the voice said it again, slower this time. "Follow the drums." Alvarez and Grant looked at me, realizing the same thing. It wasn't command. Mason said he heard movement behind us. I turned just in time to see shapes sliding through the fog again. They were closer this time, walking in a wide arc to box us in. Their torches burned blue, not orange. The light flickered without smoke. We broke into a sprint. The terrain sloped down toward water. The fog thinned just enough to show the outline of a boat dock ahead. It looked old but intact. Mason ran ahead to check it while we covered him. Then the ground beneath him cracked. The mud swallowed his leg up to the thigh. Alvarez ran to pull him free, but the soil pulled harder. It moved like it was breathing. We grabbed him together and dragged him out, leaving his boot behind. The mud hissed, releasing a foul smell like rot. Mason coughed, face pale. His ankle was covered in thin red lines, like something had wrapped around it. Alvarez wrapped it quick and told him to stay on the boat once we reached it. We got there just as the drumming started again. This time it came from all directions, echoing through the trees and over the water. Grant shouted he saw figures along the opposite bank. Dozens of them. They were standing still, lined up shoulder to shoulder. The tallest one stepped forward, lifted its hand, and the drumming stopped. Then every radio we carried switched on at once. A voice, calm and human, said, "You shouldn't have come." The same voice repeated through every channel, every headset. Alvarez smashed his radio. Grant threw his into the water. Mason covered his ears and shouted that he could still hear it inside his head. We pushed the boat off the dock and started the engine. The motor struggled but caught. The current was rough, pulling against us. I looked back and saw the shore shifting again, trees bending, the ground folding in on itself like waves of dirt. The figures didn't chase. They just stood there, still, until the fog covered them. We thought we were free once the island started to fade behind us. Then the compass needle spun again. The GPS screen went blank. The shoreline we aimed for vanished. In every direction was fog and water. Alvarez said we were caught in a current that didn't make sense. The waves were moving in circles, pulling us toward the center. The same spiral pattern carved into the island was now forming in the water around the boat. Grant yelled to kill the engine. We did, but the current didn't stop. It dragged us faster toward the middle. In the fog ahead, I saw something rise from the water, a structure of wood and stone, shaped like the ruins we'd seen inland. At its peak, a faint red glow pulsed, same color as the hollow chest of the tall figure. The air turned sharp and electric. Mason screamed that the drumming was inside the boat now, under the floor. The sound came from below, from something knocking against the hull. I looked down and saw handprints pressing through the wood from beneath, pale fingers clawing, dragging. Alvarez fired into the water. The sound echoed, but nothing surfaced. Then the knocking stopped and the water went still. The spiral current faded. The glow disappeared. For a long time we drifted in silence. No wind, no sound. The island was gone. I turned to Grant to ask for bearings, but he just stared at me, face pale as chalk. Behind him in the fog, the outline of the island had reappeared. Only now it looked closer than before, and the beacon light blinked again from the trees, brighter than ever. We had left, but the island hadn't let us go. The fog never lifted. It wrapped the boat in a gray wall that moved like smoke. We drifted for hours or maybe longer. The compass didn't work, and the GPS showed blank space. The air was cold even though it was still summer. Alvarez tried to keep us steady, guiding the boat by sound. Every few minutes we'd hear a splash or a faint knock, somewhere off the stern. Mason sat against the hull, staring at his bandaged ankle. His skin looked gray, veins dark under the surface. Grant kept scanning for a signal. He said the radio kept picking up small bursts of static that sounded like words. Not voices we knew, just low murmurs, repeating in rhythm with the waves. The same pulse we'd heard from the drums. He turned the dial slowly, trying to catch something clear. Then through the static, a woman's voice whispered a single word. "Return." We all froze. Grant turned it off right away. None of us said anything, but the word stuck in my head. Return. To where? To the island? Or to whatever waited there? The fog began to thin just a little, enough to see shapes ahead. I thought it was the mainland, but the outlines didn't fit. The trees were taller, denser, and the land sloped up like a ridge. Alvarez said it couldn't be the same island, but Mason pointed to the beacon light. It was the same color, same pulse. We hadn't gone anywhere. The current had brought us in a wide circle back to the same place. We hit shallow water. The motor coughed and died. Grant cursed under his breath. We pushed the boat as far as we could before grounding it on a patch of sand. The fog closed in again behind us, cutting off the way we came. We decided to move inland and find higher ground. The trees near the shore were thicker than before. The leaves were damp and smelled like iron. Every few steps, I'd see markings carved into trunks, spirals again, but now joined by lines and shapes that looked like maps. It almost seemed like the island was redrawing itself around us. We found what looked like a path. It led toward a cluster of ruins, stone and wood mixed together like something half-built and half-grown. The air there felt heavy, thicker than before. The moment we stepped inside, the radios came alive, all at once. Bursts of static, overlapping voices, whispers calling our ranks, our names. I heard mine clearly, said by a voice that sounded like me. Alvarez threw his headset down and stomped on it. "We're done with that," he said. But the sound didn't stop. It came from the ground now, from under the stones. I knelt down and pressed my hand to the dirt. It vibrated slightly like something deep below was moving. Mason limped closer, pointing at the walls. Symbols covered every surface, carved into the stone and painted over in dark red clay. He said they reminded him of tribal markings, but some were English letters, a mix of names, dates, and phrases. One read, "The tribe remains. The lost remember." Another said, "The blood remembers the oath." Grant found something behind one of the stone slabs, a set of wooden steps leading underground. They looked new, not centuries old. Alvarez said we should leave it alone, but Grant was already halfway down. His flashlight cut through the dark, showing a long corridor lined with bones. Some human, some not. The smell down there hit hard, like old water and rot. I followed him. Alvarez and Mason stayed up top, keeping watch. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The walls were damp, covered in strange growths that pulsed faintly with light. Grant's beam caught a small object half buried in mud. He picked it up. It was a helmet, US issue, rusted but recognizable. The tag inside still had a name, Corporal L. Hardy, 1943. Grant looked at me, pale. "That's the same year as the dog tag on that body," he said. I nodded. "Same operation, maybe." We moved further down. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The ceiling was low, the air still. In the center was a pit filled with dark water. Floating in it were pieces of wood, rope, and bones. Above the pit hung a cross made of driftwood, tied with strips of cloth. Grant's radio clicked back on by itself. A deep male voice spoke through it, calm and clear. "This is Hardy. If you hear this, leave now." We both stared at the device. The voice repeated, slower this time. They listened through the blood. "Leave before night." Then the radio shut off. We rushed back up. Alvarez was pacing at the entrance. Mason sat on the ground, sweating and pale. His bandaged ankle was dark now, almost black. Alvarez said it had started spreading an hour ago. I pulled the wrap off. The skin was cracked and moving slightly, like something underneath was pushing to get out. Mason grabbed my arm and begged me to cut it. I refused. Alvarez took out a syringe and sedative, but Mason shoved him away. He screamed once and then went still. The skin on his leg tore open. What came out wasn't blood. It was a black fluid, thick like oil. It spread fast across the ground, burning the soil. The smell was sharp and metallic. Grant pulled Mason back, but his body went limp. His eyes opened wide, and for a moment he smiled. Then his lips moved, and a voice came out. Not his own. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, same tone as the voice from the radio. Then Mason went rigid and fell. His eyes stayed open, no pulse. We stood frozen for a long moment. Alvarez whispered a prayer. I closed Mason's eyes and covered him with a tarp. We couldn't carry him. We couldn't bury him either. The ground where he lay hissed like acid. We packed fast and left the ruins. Grant looked back once and said he saw the cross glowing faintly in the dark. I didn't turn around. I just kept moving. The drumming started again, distant but steady. Alvarez said it was coming from the North Ridge. We didn't have many options, so we followed it. The path wound up a hill that overlooked the marsh. The air grew clear as we climbed. From the top, we could see the whole island, or what we thought was the whole island. There were structures everywhere, not just ruins, but small fires burning in neat circles, signs of camps, settlements. The tribe was real. They were living here, hidden for who knows how long. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. Near the center of the island stood a tall wooden tower, built from logs and bones. At the top, the beacon light flashed, not from our equipment, but from something older. It looked like a fire trapped in glass. Around the tower were people, hundreds of them, standing still, faces turned toward us. Grant whispered, "This isn't possible." Alvarez raised his scope. "They're not moving," he said, "not even breathing." Then the light from the tower flickered, and all their heads turned at once. Every single one of them looked up at the ridge where we stood. We ducked. The drumming stopped. Silence filled the air again. Then a voice, carried by the wind, echoed from the tower. "You returned." Grant said it sounded like Hardy's voice again, deeper and strained. The beacon flashed faster, lighting up the shapes below. I saw movement this time. The tribe was walking toward the ridge, slow and steady, like a wave of bodies pushing through the trees. Alvarez said we needed to move back down, fast. Grant grabbed his pack, and we started running. The ground shook with every beat of the drums. Shadows moved between the trees, closer every second. Branches cracked, and the air filled with whispers. We could hear them saying our names again. We reached the base of the ridge, but the path we came from was gone. The forest had closed around it. The fog rolled in again, thicker than before. Grant tried to cut through with his flashlight, but the beam reflected back like a mirror. Then we heard a sound that froze us. Mason's voice. He was calling from somewhere behind the trees, calm and steady, asking for help. Alvarez raised his rifle and shouted for him to show himself. The voice kept coming, closer now. "I found the way," it said. "Follow me." Grant whispered, "He's dead." The voice laughed softly, then it repeated, "Follow me." We stood in silence, waiting, listening. A shape appeared between the trees, the same size and build as Mason, but wrong, too stiff. The head tilted at an unnatural angle. The figure smiled, then turned and walked toward the forest. Alvarez fired a burst. The shape vanished. The echo of the shots faded fast, swallowed by the fog. Then the drumming started again, faster than ever. I grabbed Grant's arm and pulled him toward open ground. We ran until we reached another clearing, small and circular, with a stone altar in the center. On it lay a pile of modern gear, helmets, radios, dog tags, cameras, all covered in thin layers of ash. Grant picked up a camera. It still worked. The last video showed the missing survey team, 6 of them standing by the same altar. One of them said, "We found the tribe." They never left. Then the footage turned black. I heard something move behind us. Alvarez turned and fired again. The flash lit up the clearing for 1 second. I saw faces in the dark, dozens of them, eyes glowing faintly white. We backed toward the altar. The ground under it began to vibrate, the same pulse as the drums. The sound grew louder until it wasn't sound anymore, but pressure. I felt it in my chest, my teeth, my head. Grant dropped the camera and shouted that the ground was opening. Cracks spread around the altar. Red light glowed from below. I yelled for everyone to move. Alvarez grabbed me, pulling me back as the stones split apart. Something came out of the light. Not a body, a shape, shifting and human, but not. It moved like smoke and bone mixed together. The drums stopped again. The thing raised its head, and I saw what looked like dozens of faces shifting across it, one after another. Men, women, children, all silent. Then it spoke. The lost remain. The light surged, blinding us for a moment. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. The altar was gone. Only the sound of waves and wind remained. Grant was beside me, shaking, eyes wide. Alvarez stood a few feet away, rifle still raised. None of us spoke. We just looked at the forest, waiting for it to move again. The beacon light still flashed in the distance, steady and red. The island wasn't done with us yet. The red beacon kept flashing in the distance, steady and slow, like a heartbeat. We didn't speak as we moved. The air around us felt heavy, thicker with each step. Alvarez led the way, his rifle raised. Grant followed behind him, flashlight shaking in his hand. I stayed close, counting every sound, the wind, the brush, our boots against wet soil. No other noises. That silence meant they were near. I could feel them watching again, the same cold prickle across my neck. We decided to move toward the tower. Whatever controlled that light was pulling us. We had to end it. There was no extraction, no help. Command wasn't coming. If we didn't shut that thing down, we weren't leaving. The path bent around a ridge of dead trees. Each trunk was carved with spirals deeper than before. Grant stopped to look at one, shining his light close. There were faces in the bark, dozens of them, not carved, not drawn, pressed, human features frozen in the wood. Eyes, mouths, noses stretched into the grain. I felt sick. Alvarez whispered that they looked alive. We didn't stay to check. The closer we got to the beacon, the louder the air seemed to hum. It wasn't sound anymore, just pressure building in the chest. The ground felt soft underfoot, like walking over hollow space. Grant said the tower couldn't be far, maybe a few hundred yards. Then the fog split for a second, and we saw it. The tower was taller than I imagined, rough wood bound with bone and rope, rising high through the mist. The red light pulsed from the top, bright enough to paint the whole clearing in color. Around its base stood rows of poles with masks tied to them, the same bone masks we'd seen before, facing outward like guards. We crouched near the tree line, watching. There were figures moving around the tower, not many, maybe a dozen. Each carried a torch that gave off no smoke. They circled the tower in slow rhythm, stepping to a silent beat. Alvarez whispered that they were performing some kind of ritual. The way they moved, every step matched the pulse of the beacon. Grant said he could see a power source, maybe a generator, attached to the tower base. I thought he was seeing things, but when I looked closer, I saw cables, real ones, running from the structure into the ground. I couldn't explain it. How could something ancient be connected to modern equipment? We decided to approach from the north side, staying low and quiet. Alvarez covered our rear. Grant and I moved ahead. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and soft mud. I counted 6 torches burning in a circle. The figures didn't react to our movement. They kept walking the same pattern, as if we weren't there. We got close enough to touch the outer posts. The masks were carved from skull fragments, some animal, some human. The eye sockets were filled with clay, the mouths sealed with mud. I looked past them toward the tower base. There in the dirt were bones arranged like a pattern. Ribs, spines, skulls forming the same spiral we'd seen everywhere. Grant crept forward to the cables. They were thick, rubber-coated, military-grade. He followed them to a small metal box half buried in the soil. He opened it and froze. Inside was a power module stamped with a Navy marking and a serial number. He whispered, "This is ours. This is modern tech. This shouldn't be here." Before I could answer, a voice spoke from behind the tower. Calm, slow, clear. "You came back." We ducked behind the poles, weapons ready. A tall figure stepped into the light. He wore a uniform, torn, burned, but still military. His name tag read Hardy, the same name from the radio, the dog tag, the voice in the tunnel. His skin was pale, dry like paper. His eyes were clouded but focused. He looked more dead than alive. He carried no weapon, just stood there staring at us. Alvarez whispered, "That can't be real." Hardy smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have followed the signal." I stepped forward. "Who are you? What happened here?" He tilted his head. "They promised us power. Communication through time. The first experiment failed. The island kept what we built. It feeds on what finds it." Grant shook his head. "This tech isn't supposed to exist here." Hardy took a step closer. "It shouldn't, but you brought it again. The signal always returns to its source." His voice shifted, growing deeper, layered like 2 people speaking at once. "You kept the circle alive. The torches flared suddenly, blue flames rising high. The figures around the tower stopped moving. They turned toward us in unison, masks tilting. I aimed my rifle. Hardy raised a hand. "You can't kill what isn't dead." Then he smiled wider. "You joined them the moment you arrived." The ground started shaking. The bones in the spiral shifted, turning slowly. The red beacon flashed faster, pulsing in rhythm with the rumble. Alvarez shouted that the whole tower was moving. The cables strained, sparking. Grant yelled that we had to cut the power. He ran to the box, pulled a knife, and slashed the first wire. Sparks flew. The light dimmed for a moment, then grew brighter. The hum turned into a low roar. Hardy screamed. The figures moved toward us. We opened fire. The bullets hit, but the bodies didn't fall. They staggered, then kept walking, slow but steady. Alvarez switched to burst fire, aiming for heads. One fell, but when it hit the ground, it broke apart into ash. The air filled with that smell again, iron and smoke. Grant cut the second cable. The beacon flickered. The tower groaned like it was alive. Hardy dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. "You can't stop it," he said, voice breaking. "You can only trade your place." The ground split under him. A red glow poured out. The spiral of bones began sinking into the crack, as if being swallowed. I grabbed Grant by the arm and yelled to run. Alvarez fired one last burst before following. The tower leaned, wood snapping. The light at the top turned white, blinding. We dove behind the ridge as the tower collapsed. The blast threw dirt and debris in all directions. The air turned thick with dust. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything but ringing. When it cleared, the light was gone. Only smoke and the faint sound of water moving through the ground. Grant coughed, wiping his face. "Did we kill it?" he asked. Alvarez looked around. "Maybe." But I didn't feel safe. The forest was too quiet again. The hum had stopped, but the silence was heavier now. We stood slowly, scanning the area. The tower was gone, reduced to wreckage. The cables had melted into the soil. The red light had faded completely. Hardy was nowhere in sight. Only the burned outline of where he had stood remained, marked by a faint spiral burned into the dirt. Grant took out his radio, more out of habit than hope. Static, then a voice. Not Hardy this time, but command, clear, real. "They were asking for our coordinates," Grant shouted back. Alvarez laughed for the first time in days. I couldn't believe it. Maybe it was over. Maybe we could leave. We made our way back toward the shore, following the slope downhill. The forest looked different now, brighter. The mist had thinned, and sunlight was breaking through the branches. The birds were back. It felt wrong how normal it seemed. When we reached the beach, our boat was there. Same place we left it, floating steady in the water. The tide was calm. Grant checked the fuel, still half full. Alvarez looked at me, waiting for a word. I nodded. "Let's get out." We pushed off and started the engine. The motor hummed smooth. For the first time since we arrived, the island looked still. No fog, no lights, just trees and sand. We didn't speak, just stared as the shoreline drifted away. The relief felt unreal. A few miles out, the radio came alive again. Command's voice was clear. They said they'd been tracking our signal for 2 days, that a rescue chopper was on the way. Alvarez laughed again, this time with real relief. Grant leaned back, eyes closed, whispering, "We made it." I looked over the side of the boat at the water. It was calm, but the color seemed darker than it should be, like something moving just beneath the surface. I told myself it was shadows, nothing more. But then I saw a ripple, a small spiral forming around the hull, slow and steady. "Grant," I said quietly. He opened his eyes and looked down. His face went pale. The spiral grew larger, spreading outward. Alvarez cut the engine. The water stilled, then bubbled again, faint but rhythmic. I leaned closer. For a moment I saw something under the surface. Shapes, not fish, not rocks. Faces, dozens of them, floating just below, eyes open, mouths moving with the motion of the waves. Grant whispered, "They're following." Before I could answer, the radio crackled again. Command's voice faded, replaced by static. Then another voice came through, faint but clear. Hardy's. "The circle doesn't end." You only move inside it. Grant threw the radio into the water. It sank fast. The spiral faded. The sea calmed again. We didn't speak for the rest of the trip. The sun rose higher, and for a while everything looked normal. The mainland came into view, small and distant, but real. Alvarez said he'd never set foot on an island again. Grant just stared at the horizon, eyes red, silent. When the chopper came, we waved it down. The pilot looked shocked when he saw us, said we'd been listed missing for 8 days. I told him that wasn't possible. We'd only been gone 2 nights. He didn't argue. He just told us to get in. As the chopper lifted, I looked back one last time. Roanoke Island was barely a shape now, a shadow in the sea. But for a brief second, I saw a red light blink from the trees, one single pulse. Then it was gone. No one spoke the whole ride back. Command debriefed us in silence. They took our gear, our radios, even the clothes we wore. Said it was standard procedure. We never saw the recordings again. The report listed the mission as signal recovery incomplete. They didn't ask what we'd seen. Maybe they already knew. Alvarez retired a month later. Grant moved away, changed numbers. I stayed in for a while but never took another assignment near the coast. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the drums. Not loud, not close, just faint, like a heartbeat under the floor. I tell myself it's nothing, just memory. But when I look at the ocean, I see the waves moving in circles, always in circles. And sometimes when the tide is low, I think I see a red light blink beneath the surface. Just once, then gone. The island never let anyone leave. It only waits for the next to return. They kept us in medical quarantine for 3 weeks after extraction. Doctors ran every test they could. Blood samples, scans, sleep studies. They said it was to rule out infection or radiation exposure. But the way they avoided eye contact told me they were looking for something else. They burned our uniforms, locked away our weapons, and told us to forget the details. The official file said, mission interference due to environmental hazard. They never used the word Roanoke. Alvarez didn't sleep much during those weeks. He'd wake up screaming some nights, shouting about faces in the walls. They gave him sedatives and kept the lights dim. I saw the same things, though I didn't tell anyone. When the lights flickered, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of the room. Shadows shaped like people, standing still until I blinked. Then they were gone. Grant was quieter than both of us. He stayed up late in the infirmary, staring at the ceiling or scribbling in a notebook. One night he showed me what he was writing. It was the pattern, the same spiral from the island. He said he couldn't stop drawing it. Every time he tried to write words, the spiral came out instead. The doctors took the notebook away. He started drawing it on the walls with his fingernail. Command debriefed us one last time before discharge. A colonel I'd never met asked simple questions in a calm voice. He wanted to know when we lost radio contact, how long we were without navigation, and if we retrieved any samples. I told him no, though I remembered Grant pocketing that small piece of cable from the tower. The colonel nodded, thanked me for my service, and told me to rest. His last words were strange. If you hear the signal again, don't answer. A few weeks later, they let us go. Alvarez went south to stay with family. Grant moved west. I stayed near the coast because I couldn't stand being far from the ocean. Maybe part of me still wanted proof that what happened was real. I watched the tides every evening, waiting for the red light that sometimes flashed across the water. One night, about 6 months later, Grant called. His voice was flat, slow. He said the radio had turned on by itself. He'd smashed it, but the sound kept coming from the walls. Before I could answer, the line went dead. I tried calling back. Nothing. A few days later, Command sent a message saying he'd been found at home, dead of cardiac failure. No sign of struggle. They listed it as natural. But I'd seen the autopsy photo. His hand was curled into a fist. Carved into his palm was a perfect spiral. After that, I stopped sleeping well. Every dream felt the same. The island, the drums, the red light. I'd wake up with salt on my skin, like sea spray. I told myself it was sweat, but I knew better. Alvarez sent one last letter before he disappeared. No return address, just a few words written in shaky handwriting. It's calling again. Don't go back. I burned the letter, but the message stayed in my head. I left the service a year later. Sometimes I still drive down to the coast at night and park near the docks. I listen to the static on an old radio, the same model we used then. Most nights it's quiet, but sometimes just before dawn, the static hums in rhythm with my heartbeat. And for a few seconds, I can almost hear a drum in the distance. I tell myself it's nothing, just the sea, the wind, the memories. But deep down, I know the truth. Roanoke Island doesn't let go. It waits, patient and silent, for those who remember. And someday, when the fog rolls in and the tide pulls back, it'll call again. And someone will answer. I'm the only one left now. Alvarez vanished 3 years ago. They said he drowned off the Florida coast, but his boat was found floating, engine running, no body. Inside the cabin, investigators found a small wooden mask, the same kind we saw in Roanoke. I didn't need to hear more. I knew the island had called him back. It always finds a way. I've lived quietly since then. No uniform, no reports, no chain of command. I don't talk about what happened to anyone. People think I'm another veteran with a bad memory, maybe too many years in the dark. That's fine. It's better they never know. Some truths are poison when spoken out loud. Every few months, I still get letters. No return address. Just short messages written in the same jagged handwriting. Sometimes a single word, sometimes a phrase. Remember, the circle turns. Once it only said, "You left something behind." The postmark always traces back to the Carolina coast. I burned each one, but I keep the ashes in a small tin box. I tell myself it's just paper, but when I shake it, I can hear a faint sound inside, like something moving, waiting. I've gone through every record I could find. The old colony, the missing survey crew, Hardy's World War II unit, all of them vanished near the same coordinates. None of their names appear in official archives anymore. It's like the island erased them. Maybe that's how it keeps its secret. Maybe that's the real curse of Roanoke. Not death, but being forgotten. Sometimes I think about going back. Not because I want to, but because part of me feels like I never really left. When I close my eyes, I still see the fog and hear the drums. It's faint, always at the edge of sleep. I've tried moving inland, but the silence there feels worse. The ocean is honest. You can hear when it breathes. The island, though, it listens. Last winter, a research team announced plans to survey new erosion zones near Roanoke. When I saw the headline, my stomach turned. The photo showed them unloading equipment, smiling, unaware. In the background, behind the trees, I swear there was a faint red glow. No one else noticed. I called the number listed in the report and told them to stay away, but the line disconnected. A week later, a storm hit that area. Their vessel was lost, no survivors. I didn't sleep for days after that. I kept hearing the word Hardy said before the tower fell. Trade your place. Maybe the island doesn't destroy everyone who finds it. Maybe it just takes one each time to keep the balance. That thought scares me more than anything else, because if that's true, then I know who it's waiting for next. I've stopped fighting the memories. I keep the radio on at night, tuned to static. The hum calms me. Some nights I think I hear faint voices again, not angry or frightening anymore, just distant. They sound tired, familiar, like men who've finally accepted where they are. I don't answer. I just listen until it fades. There's one thing I've never told anyone. When the tower collapsed and we ran for the boat, I grabbed something from the dirt without realizing it. It was a shard of glass, smooth, glowing faintly red. I kept it hidden all these years. The light still flickers sometimes, soft like a heartbeat. I should throw it away, but I can't. It feels alive, and part of me knows it's the last piece of proof that any of it happened. Or maybe it's just the island's way of reminding me that I'm still part of the circle. I've learned to live with it. The fear fades, but the memory doesn't. Every time the wind shifts from the east, carrying that salt smell, I know the island is out there, silent, patient, waiting beneath the fog. Not a ghost story, not a myth. A living wound that never healed. If you ever find yourself near those waters and your radio picks up a faint pulse you can't explain, turn back. Don't listen. Don't answer. Once you hear it, it never stops. The lost colony was never lost. It was found, and it keeps finding more. That's the truth I carry, the one they buried under reports and silence. And now that you know it, maybe that means the circle's already turning again. If you hear the drums, don't look toward the sound. Just keep walking, because once you see that red light, it's already too late. Before you go, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. You might not believe what I've told you, but if you ever visit the coast and the fog rolls in thick, remember this story. Stay away from Roanoke Island. That's where we disappeared, and that's where it's still waiting.